Good morning from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Over 2 million people are still without power this morning following Hurricane Sandy. And New Jersey election officials have announced that voters displaced by the storm will be able to vote via email or fax. Kind of incredible. Right now, joining me today, we have Josh Barro, columnist for Bloomberg View, MSNBC contributor Joy Reid, also managing editor of our sister website, thegrio.com, my colleague at The Nation magazine, actually my boss, Katrina vanden Heuvel, where she is editor and publisher, and Bob Herbert, former New York Times columnist and now senior fellow at the progressive think tank BMO. It's great to have you guys all back at the table. Well, in case you haven't noticed, we are now 2 days away from the presidential election, and a batch of new polls released yesterday suggests the president is holding his small but significant lead in key swing states. A Des Moines Register poll of likely voters released yesterday has President Obama up 5 points in that state, and two new NBC News Wall Street Journal Marist polls have the president leading by 6 points in Ohio and 2 points in Florida. With the polls in these key states relatively stable over the last few weeks, it would seem there is little persuading left to do. In fact, both sides agree on what's really going to decide this campaign now, and that's turnout. Last week, Republican National Chairman Reince Priebus touted his party's get out the vote machine.
We're far ahead of where we were in 2008, and we're going to be, our ground game is better than their ground game. We are going to do more voter contacts this year than all of 2008 and all of 2004 combined. We have an army on the ground, Candy.
Democrats, for their part, have invested heavily in a robust, cutting-edge program of targeting likely voters on the ground in swing states. That strategy, Vice President Joe Biden said at a meeting with campaign workers in Iowa on Thursday, is what's going to put President Obama over the top.
Hey, you know why we're going to win is because of you all. Yeah. No, I'm serious. Give me a second. I genuinely mean it. The thing is, the difference in this election, once again, is going to be the ground game. And because of you, Iowa, Ohio, Wisconsin, Colorado, we have the best ground game because of you all, of any presidential campaign in history. And it's going to make the difference. It's going to make the difference.
So far, at least, the numbers would seem to bear Biden out. Democrats, for example, hold a significant edge among early voters in the key swing states of Florida, Iowa, Nevada, while Republicans hold an edge in Colorado. So Democrats seem to be mobilizing their voters rather effectively so far. The question is, will that trend hold on Election Day, and how much of a difference will it make? I find something fascinating in the focus now on turnout, because turnout and field operations were for so long the kind of red-headed stepchild of campaigns. All the money, all the glamour, all the glory were in TV ad buys, were in persuasion programs. And things started to change. The Republicans instituted a Get Out the Vote program that was very effective in 2004 particularly. There was this thing called the 72-Hour Project, which was Karl Rove's pet project. There was ACT, remember America Coming Together in 2004? It's funny. People forget when we're talking about independent expenditures. There was a whole different universe of independent expenditures in 2004, particularly on the Democratic side, that was under 527s as opposed to super PACs. And it was done independent of the campaigns and largely field efforts, right? But what's amazing is that the status of field has really increased. And I think people are now persuaded that in the world of politics and even in punditry, of the importance of this. And I think it kind of represents an interesting sea change in just opinions about how we think about these elections.
Yeah, it's amazing because, while ACT was not ultimately successful in their goal of trying to help John Kerry get elected, what survived from that America Coming Together model is a bigger reliance on data. What America Coming Together was doing was simply switching the whole idea of campaigns from being, sort of grassroots and we're just out there talking to folks to being really micro-targeting. We're going to look at this block and we're going to say this house, and this house are likely Democratic households. This person in this house is our target, not that person. And then we're going to zero in on that person and we're going to contact them over and over again until we get them out to vote. And using data and all of that sort of thing also was migrated into the Obama campaign, which made it even more micro-targeted. We're going to be in a video game. You're going to be in your video game and there's an Obama ad. We're going to find you exactly where you live, like Coca-Cola markets to you. And that has survived that whole ACT model.
It actually bothers me a little bit. It's obviously really important. excuse me, Obama, seems to have mastered this whole thing. But the micro-targeting, the sophisticated analysis and that sort of thing, there's a little thing called the voters and things called issues and how you get voters energized in your candidacy and in your platform. And I think we lose a great deal of that when we start talking so much about what is it going to take to specifically win this election.
Defend that.
Could I second? I'll second the emotion. But let me.
I'm going to argue with both of you.
I'll second the emotion. I do think it's become like an algorithm, a science. This micro targeting of voters. You lose sight of the people. You lose sight of the issues on the ground. However, if you have field offices in all the communities, counties in Ohio, you're trying to engage people on the ground, which is far better than the air war, which the Republicans have relied on. But here's the deal. To me, the Democrats, at best, trying to expand the electorate. Right? And we're going to see a lot of fighting over that come November 6th as voting suppression hits full force. And the Republicans talk a good game on that, but they're not doing that. They're doing the ad war. They're bringing in the big guns, the big money.
Or they're trying to shrink the electorate.
They're trying to shrink the electorate. And in the last 3 weeks, we've seen 36 independent, non-disclosed super PACs and other groups come in with millions and millions. And that's about shrinking the electorate. That's about distancing voters from participatory politics.
But let me argue with this idea for a second. So here's the number of Obama and Romney field offices, respectively, in swing states. And what you see, the theme here, the blue bars are Obama. There are many more Obama offices and Romney offices. And I should, full disclosure, my brother has been an organizer of the Obama campaign for 5 years. He started back in 2007. He's now the state director in Nevada. So I've seen this through his eyes. But I think that there's a degree to which, when it's functioning the best, there's a feedback loop. I mean, the point is that if you have people going to the doors every day and you're doing constant focus grouping and you're doing these constant interactions with voters to see what's moving them, that's pretty much democracy at its core, right? I mean, if you're finding that when you're going to the doors, women aged 20 to 35 really are worried about birth control and access to it, then what you see is that moves the way what the president talks about.
It's too cold.
Why is that cold?
It's chilling. It's like the big ad corporations. What you want to do is get a feel for the electorate long before it's election time, and then provide the kind of leadership that get people pumped up about your program in advance, and then have the field offices and your field operation come in as profound tools to get those voters to the polls.
There is something cynical. There is something. I mean, I believe. Listen, what we're talking about.
I'm amazed by this.
I am all for what you call retail politicking, right? I think like Working America, an affiliate of the AFL, going door to door, speaking to the working people of Pennsylvania or Ohio, trying to find out what's on their mind, trying to talk to them. But here's the deal. That's somewhat different than someone from the Democratic Party doing an algorithmic micro-targeting in order to move you to the polls, because are they going to be with you after Election Day?
That's the question.
I have to defend, since I did work for American.
Push back on the anti-data part of the table here.
Yeah, liberals are supposed to be the data people. We're supposed to believe in the math. Look, the bottom line is it's been shown throughout elections that person-to-person contacts matter more and move people more than a generic sort of a message. And so the idea that you would do sort of blanket targeting and blanket messaging rather than doing this micro-targeting, which is person-to-person, doesn't make sense. And look, by the time you get to 6 weeks out from an election, that is not the time when you need to be going person-to-person and presenting them with issues. That is the time when you need to be moving people to the polls. Well, you have to presume that your policies are already something that they favor. That's why you're targeting.
That's not a safe. Why is that a safe assumption?
That's what is being done by these campaigns.
That's driving people to the polls.
That is what this is about.
And why are liberals the data people? I don't want us to be the data people. I want us to be the people. We're turning the voters into data points instead of people.
But you know what?
Exactly.
I think
I'm actually very amused by Bob's reaction here, because I think it's very similar to the way a lot of liberals I know react to corporate marketing, like the thing where Target figures out you're pregnant before you've told anybody you're pregnant.
Which is people find creepy.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think when companies know what I want and they're able to send me ads that are
when you get that email saying you've been inseminated, that's a great email.
Yeah, exactly.
But here's the thing.
But why not do that in the political space?
The right-wingers think that's great, too. And what the right-wingers are for, I'm again.
But the interesting thing is that the Republican campaigns do a lot less of this than the Democratic campaigns.
Yes, that's the irony.
Which I think is a mistake on their part.
It is, because I agree that it helps you win elections. There's no question about that.
It
doesn't help you run the country.
It
especially does not help the people.
But listen,
does it do anything, for example, to help poor people in this country?
I think it does.
No.
Because I think, the electorate isn't one thing. The electorate is a diverse group of people with different interests. And this allows you to get out messages that wouldn't be broad enough to put in.
Let me
say what
this very non-controversial topic has erupted at the table. Wait, hold on one second.
First of all, I believe that we are the party of science and reason as science is assaulted by the Republicans. But let's say you go to someone's door and it's not just 6 weeks out and someone says, the most important thing to me is jobs.
Right.
Where does that factor into what emerges after the election?
Exactly.
That's a question. Hold that thought, because I want to bring in the person who literally wrote the book on this. Sasha Eisenberg wrote an amazing book called The Victory Lab, which is about the technology and the cutting edge of campaign techniques. And right after we take this break, we're going to talk to him. I want to bring in Sasha Eisenberg, columnist for Slate.com and author of The Victory Lab, The Secret Science of Winning Campaigns. And Sasha, I think you've seen our heated argument about the benefits and perhaps drawbacks of this kind of cutting-edge field. But before you weigh in on that, because I think I know where you stand on that, my first question to you is the Obama turnout program hype, or are they actually doing something that hasn't been done before?
Yeah, I mean, the quality of data and the sort of alacrity of the analysis that they're doing on the Obama campaign is way ahead of, it's significantly ahead of where they were in 2008, but there's just generally a huge advantage that the left has over the right that is apparent in what Obama's doing, but also in what allies like the AFL, as Katrina mentioned. It's a larger gap, I think, right now between how the left and right practice politics on the ground than there's been probably in any other aspect of sort of the campaigning enterprise in the last generation.
And one of the things that you've written about, you wrote a really great long piece in Slate, and the book is really fantastic. I would recommend people take a look.
Thank you.
There's been this kind of empiricism brought, and I say this with all the freight that it carries to the alchemists at the right part of the table here, that there's this empiricism that's been brought to bear in which you have people that are actually coming out of academia and doing actual field experiments, controlled experiments, and using that to bring it to bear. And I wanted to show this one study from 2009. Seth Maskett, who's one of the people you talk about, he actually went through and he said, does having a field office actually increase turnout? And he did this regression analysis, the Democratic vote share in counties without a field office and those with, and he found that there was a significant difference. In fact, he thought that the presence of field offices, and you see that on the right, that's if you have an Obama office, that's the increase in your share of voter turnout in Colorado, and if you didn't in the county, right? He found that it was enough to win essentially 3 states for Barack Obama, and those 3 states, in that election weren't the margin, but they could be here.
Right. I mean, so everything we know from the last decade, the 2 major innovations are the use of these field experiments, which finally are able to disentangle cause and effect in individual interactions. So we can talk romantically about it's great people talking to their neighbors at their doors, but because people have done these randomized trials, we know that there is a value to a conversation at the door over the similar conversation on the phone. And we know that a volunteer has more of an impact mobilizing a voter than a paid call center. Even though if they don't introduce themselves at the beginning of the interaction, voters apparently can hear the difference. And we know that what campaigns call chatty scripts, which are basically interactions that have some back and forth between the canvasser or caller and the voter, have an impact that what they call robotic scripts, where I just read at you for a minute, don't have. And so the reason the campaigns are opening these field offices is because they are able to price those, put a value on those individual interactions that they weren't able to 10, 15 years ago. And so it's not just that people are putting out the field offices because they want to be closer to the people. It's that they know the value of being closer to the people that they want to move.
Some of the pioneers in this are Donald Green and Alan Gerber. They wrote a book called Get Out the Vote, which I remember when I was a field organizer in 2004 reading, because they were the first people to do this kind of real field-tested, controlled experiment. And what you just mentioned, I just want to throw this up. The number of people you need to contact per vote, this is one of their big findings. If you send out nonpartisan mail, you got to send about 200 people, or a commercial phone bank, about 180 people. But if you go to a volunteer phone bank or a commercial phone bank, you're down to 35 people, and door-to-door, you're down to 14 people. So when you get down to door-to-door, every 14 people you talk to, you're going to garner a vote. And those are the kind of metrics that we now have.
But
so what's your problem with that, Katrina?
Let's have a chatty script.
Yeah.
Let's have a little interactive, not robotic script.
Exactly.
Listen, I mean, I don't feel I'm an alchemist. I respect the idea of going door to door. I respect the feedback loop. But here's a radical
ask them
idea.
A human question.
Keep those field offices in those towns and communities after the election. You want a real feedback loop?
It does not translate into policy. The number one issue.
I want to say there is a difference, and I think you said this in the break, Chris. There's a difference between marketing and democracy.
Right.
That line is getting increasingly blurred. I think we need to watch out for that. I respect the door-to-door, the volunteers, but I also want these feedback loops to translate into governance and go beyond an election, because we know that the first step is voting on Election Day, and then what follows is really building out a politics.
Let's just disaggregate these two questions, right? Because there's a question about the effectiveness in winning elections, and I think there's not a whole lot of question about the effectiveness here. I mean, to the extent you believe in things like controlled experiments and so forth. I'm looking at you guys over there. But then there's a broader kind of moral, political, theoretical question about democratic theory, which is about what are the implications for a democratic mandate that you may or may not have after winning this.
But can I just say that, one of the innovations that Organizing for America, which was Barack Obama's field operation in 2008, did was that when the campaign was over, OFA did not go away. Those offices did continue to exist, and the contacts continued. People who had gotten that text message, right, and signed up for it kept getting them and are still getting them to this day. There was sort of a continual contact model that David Plouffe is really credited for creating, which is the reason he didn't become the political director, because he stayed at OFA. And so they've sort of merged that with the DNC in the sense that they did leave those in place, which is why he has such a field advantage over Mitt Romney.
Let me read this quote from Jeremy Bird, who is one of the masterminds behind all this and has overseen it. He's the national field director. He says, community organizing is not a turnkey operation. You can't throw up some people, some phone banks in late summer and call that organizing. These are teams that know their turfs, the barbershops, the beauty salons. We've got congregation captains and churches. These people know their communities. It's real, deep community organizing in a way we didn't have time to do in 2008. I want to come back, Bob, because I know that I think the use of the term community organizing to describe this work is troublesome for you. And Sasha, I want to get you back in here right after we take this break. All right, Sasha, can you tell me what your expectation is? Well, first walk me through now that all this data is built up, all the ID's been done, and most of the persuasion, which is a lot of what you've written about, right? How do you find people who are possible movable votes? Most of that's done. We're now at the point of how do you make sure that someone gets out to vote? And there was this amazing thing that people on the internet had mixed feelings to, which was this pledge that the Obama campaign had people doing, where they were taking photos of themselves, pledging to vote. And my understanding is that was rooted in some real experimental results about what is the best way to actually make sure that people turn up to vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of an aestheticized version of something we do know from a lot of experiments that started almost a decade ago, which are basically that if you get somebody to fill out a pledge card and then you remind them of a commitment that they've made, that they're more likely to follow through on. And this is a finding that's come out of the behavioral sciences, that one of many things that people have translated basically from behavioral psych journals into campaigns and said, hey, can we get this to use this to motivate somebody to vote? And so one of the most successful tools is you actually get somebody to fill out a card with their name, address, all their information. Then you send them back a card with their handwriting on it immediately before the election with their reminder, and this increases turnout by several points.
And also, you're right, we know where you live, I think, in a kind of menacing kidnapper scrawl. Josh, you had a question for...
Yeah, I wanted to ask Sasha, I mean, the Democrats have taken this up so much more enthusiastically than Republicans. Do you think that's clearly a mistake on the Republicans' part, or could it be just a matter of different circumstances where the Republican coalition is less diverse, less ideologically diverse, and maybe micro-targeting isn't as essential there?
I mean, I think that historically Democrats have invested more in field and in-person voter contact and mobilization, generally because they have first underperforming parts of their coalition, young people, minorities, at least sort of before the Obama experience were the places where it was thought that you could have the most impact by mobilization. What happened between 2000 and 2004 was the Bush team took seriously the need to identify and engage under what they thought were underperforming parts of their coalition. And so you did have this evanescent interest in making serious investments in field and GOTV at the RNC and in the Bush campaign before 2004. I think that sort of faded a little bit from the Republican culture. And you also have to realize Democratic voters are in more densely packed areas. There are more 80% Democratic precincts in the country than 80% Republican precincts. And almost all of the 80% Democratic precincts are walkable. And Republicans, you just can't do that. And so, if you go to one of these precincts in Idaho, it goes 80% Republican, but you have to drive 20 minutes between your houses, and it just doesn't engender the same type of volunteer activity.
I had high hopes the Segway was going to really reinvent Republican canvassing.
Well, no, I was going to ask Sasha a question about direct mail, because one of the things that we saw in 2004 was that there was an invisible Bush campaign that we never saw their organizers anywhere, but they still managed to, for instance, do really well in Florida because they just do everything with direct mail. Has there been any data, or have there been any studies about the effectiveness of direct mail versus door-to-door field operations?
Well, yeah. So, a lot of the get out the vote tools are delivered over direct mail because that's one way that for a lot of these sort of psychological interventions, you can actually give people information in a highly targeted way. So, one of the things we've seen is the use of social pressure. These, again, coming out of the behavioral science, but the idea that if you let people know that whether or not they vote is public, that it's on file, that their neighbors can know and judge them, is really effective. And the way that you can deliver that message is often to send people a letter saying, hey, here's your vote history. Here's your neighbor's vote history. And so that's something that you can do in mail and you can't really do through other methods.
And that I think in the Gerber and Green stuff, that's some of the most effective in terms of driving turnout. Will you sketch out for us what is happening right now? What is Tuesday going to look like? I mean, if you can sort of sketch for us, for the people that aren't going to be on the ground necessarily in swing states, what that turnout operation looks like.
Yeah, so obviously early vote has sort of changed the rhythm of this. And so you have states where ultimately Tuesday is going to be a relatively small share of the electorate and does not look necessarily a whole lot different than some of the Saturdays and Sundays where the campaigns have tried to do a sort of full flush of their targets. But, there's been this sort of winnowing process throughout the year. And so the campaign sort of pushes out, a year and a half ago started trying to figure out people who are definitely going to vote for them and never going to vote for them and push them aside. And then you have the people who are likely to vote who you want to persuade, and they've worked through most of those universes now. And the people who are left tend to be, low to mid propensity voters, people who have the campaign is assessing as having a 35 or 55% chance of voting in these individual micro-targeting scores. And what's really changed is that a lot of it used to be that campaigns went out to mobilize people often by trying to give them more political information. So if you're the Obama campaign or you were the Dukakis campaign, you go out and mobilize people by saying, I'm going to talk to you more about the issues you care about and why you should like Mike Dukakis. What we see now is that campaigns through these experiments have a much clearer idea that the goal is not to change somebody's opinion or intensify it, but to modify their behavior. And so that's what all these psychological interventions that we'll see on Tuesday are about.
All right. I want to thank Sasha Eisenberg, author of The Victory Lab, The Secret Science of Winning Campaigns, for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Thanks to Citizens United, outside groups have spent massive amounts of money in this campaign. Where did it go? We'll tell you after this. All right, on Tuesday night, we will likely have the results of the first presidential campaign to take place in the post-Citizens United era. When the Supreme Court handed down its ruling in 2010, there were myriad predictions about how the decision would warp our politics, mostly dystopic visions of how the massive influx of spending by corporations and other special interests would corrode our politics and hold politicians hostage. Some of those predictions have certainly come true, and others have not. For example, we have not yet seen, as far as we can tell, the kind of direct spending from corporate treasuries that many observers predicted when the ruling first came down. What Citizens United has done, however, is unleash a new elite class of mega donors who are fueling an unprecedented growth in spending by outside groups at the national and local levels. For example, 67% of all Super PAC donations have come from just 209 donors, giving $500,000 or more. Those kinds of unregulated super PAC donations are one reason this will be the most expensive campaign in history at $6 billion. Another grim prediction come true. There's also the growth in so-called dark money, which I think is really one of the most important stories this cycle. Funneled through what are known as issue advocacy groups, which do not have to disclose the names of their donors. It's also true that outside spending is lopsided in support for Republicans. This week, for example, just this week, the Romney campaign and its allies have spent $96.4 million on ads, more than double what the Obama campaign and groups supporting him have spent. However, one major prediction that has largely not come true is a prediction by the Obama campaign itself, that once the final numbers are tallies, it would be vastly outspent by its Republican opponents. Here's what Obama campaign senior advisor David Axelrod said in June.
We're going to be the first president to be outspent, not because of what Romney's raising, but because of the super PACs. When you have people like the Koch brothers, who just were so active in Wisconsin, saying they're going to spend $400 million to impact on this race, that's more than John McCain and the Republican Party spent in total the last time. That's a source of concern. It should be a source of concern to everyone.
So while it's certainly true that Republican allies like the Koch brothers have outspent outside groups affiliated with Democrats, the Obama campaign has largely made up the gap, at least when it comes to costly television advertisements, by embracing a smart and more targeted ad strategy and because of a regulation through the FEC that gives them a discount on ad rates. To sort through all this, I've got Kim Barker, a reporter at ProPublica.org, who writes about campaign finance, joining us at the table. Great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
You've been doing fantastic reporting this cycle, so thank you for your work. It's been really great. So what is your sense of what the surprises are in this campaign in sort of the post-Citizens United world, and what are the predictions come true?
I mean, I think a couple points. Number one, you thought that corporations were going to be spending a lot of money and giving money to the super PACs, as you mentioned earlier, and you're not seeing that. You're not seeing those sort of donors come forward. And one reason could be is that you're seeing this spending by dark money groups.
Right. So we don't know if they're doing it through those dark money groups.
Right. I mean, you have some sort of sense, for instance, that Aetna has given millions of dollars to the Chamber of Commerce and to a group called American Action Network, because that was accidentally leaked. And you can see why a corporation doesn't want these sort of donations to come out. I mean, with Target, for instance.
Yeah, tell the Target story, because I think the Target story happened before this campaign got revved up. And I think what it did was it kind of it was like in baseball when you throw a fastball right by a batter's head, right? It was a brushback pitch to corporations thinking about doing this.
Right. Target had given money to a candidate, I believe it was in Minnesota, for the governor, who was seen as being anti-gay marriage. Right. And as soon as this came out, there was, a lot of boycotts organized of Target, and Target had to come out and apologize for giving this donation. And so I think that was sort of like, well, why would I want to put this out publicly, what I think? And there is a sense that, if I want to give money to a particular cause or a particular candidate, I can do it through these social welfare nonprofits or trade associations, and nobody ever has to know.
And the big ones there are Crossroads, which is being run by Karl Rove.
Crossroads GPS.
And the Chamber of Commerce also has been doing it. I didn't realize until I started digging into this just how much the Chamber has been doing. They've been a huge player.
Yeah. And then Americans for Prosperity, which is the Koch brothers group, has been spending, I think it's more than $40 million at this point on ads that are specifically against Barack Obama. And you have the sense that there's hundreds of millions of dollars, probably $1 in $4 spent by the outside groups after this election are going to be from, who knows, anonymous money. Which I think is interesting, and I don't think people are talking about it near as much as they're talking about the super PAC.
Right, the super PAC's got all the headlines.
The super PAC's got all the headlines. The dark money, the groups that are counted as 501c4s, right, that don't need to disclose. Justice Kennedy in the Citizens United decision made a point about the importance of disclosure. If there was any silver lining in that decision, it was the importance of that. We are now seeing that violated to the nth degree.
There are a number of unintentionally hilarious lines by Kennedy in the majority opinion in Citizens United. But the most hilarious is where he says, well, look, I mean, we've always had disclosure. Right. We'll be fine. Yeah. Everyone will know who's giving money, and that will act as the check on this.
But citizens can figure it out, and they can look and see who's paying for these ads.
I think one of the scariest things, we're looking at the presidential, mostly. But, the Koch brothers are going to flip the state legislature in Arkansas. You have a guy named Rex Sinquefield in Missouri, who may flip the state legislature there. So you see the possibility of these mega billionaires, millionaires, are oligarchs, flipping the control of state governments.
Let me make one important point there, though. Federal election regulations don't extend to state races. Right. And, in fact, in many states, there's already been really lax regulation.
Right.
So just so we're clear that the big money, even before Citizens United, was doing a lot.
The only thing I would say, the real hope coming out of this election is that the revulsion among people is so enormous. You have 84% of Americans, if you can build that into a real movement, across the board, transpartisan, saying that this corporate money, whether it's super PAC or dark money, is drowning out the voice of ordinary people. And I think that is something we need to build on. Not just Republicans, Democrats, but citizens of all stripes who care about this country.
Well, can I just say that, I think the same Target example that you give also does apply to some of these private foundations and these rich sort of plutocrats that are trying to fund. Just digging around trying to find out who was putting up these voter fraud billboards in Wisconsin and in Cleveland, it was almost impossible to find out who it was because they did it privately. They didn't want their name disclosed. And digging around, one of the things that I found out with this group, One Wisconsin Now, that was also trying to find it, is that you have this Bradley Foundation. The Koch brothers get all the attention, but they almost are sort of leading the vanguard and taking all of the incoming, while all of these other foundations, some of which are bigger and spend more money. The Bradley Foundation has spent something like $300 million in the last 10 years, under the radar completely, and then they are in turn funding other smaller foundations, like the Einhorn Family Foundation, that then do the actual work, but they want to be anonymous too.
And then there's a great story, Nick Confessori, who's also been doing really good reporting on this, had in the Times the other day, where now that the disclosure window has passed for this election, all of a sudden a bunch of super PACs have popped up. There's a new one that took out $1 million ad buy in North Dakota against Heidi Heitkamp, who's the Democratic Senate candidate who's actually running above expectations there, and we won't know who's funding that till after Election Day. Josh, you're going to make the case for why all this money is good right after we take a break. Just to give a sense of what the numbers that we know are, and again, we don't have a complete picture yet, partly because some of the dark money doesn't have to get disclosed till 60 days afterwards, and then the last little bit of spending is also going to be, even the stuff that is disclosed in terms of who's giving it is not going to get disclosed till after the election. But as of now, outside ad spending, $577 million spent by conservative groups, $237 spent by liberal groups, and then dark money. So this is the smaller pool of money that is outside money but not disclosed through what are called social welfare organizations who under the law, under the IRS, have to not have as their primary purpose electioneering, but their primary purpose has to be social welfare.
Helping the community.
Dark money spending, 81% of that is supporting Republican candidates and 19% supporting Democratic candidates. And then our second producer, Sal Gentile, made a great point, which I want to show this press release. To give you a sense of how saturated the ad markets are, this is a great press release. This is Romney campaign press release announcing gas station ad. And I don't mean an ad about a gas station. I mean ads at gas stations. Because they have so saturated the airwaves that they are now have a change at the pump ad that if when you go to your local gas station and start pumping gas on the little LCD screen, it's playing a Romney ad about the cost of gas because there's basically no more ad points left to buy.
Got
anywhere.
A lot of money, got to spend it.
Josh, I think you have a different perspective on this than I do.
Well, I think a lot of this is more or less inevitable. I think the parts of this that you find the most problematic are the parts that are also the most constitutionally untouchable. I can take out an ad urging you not to eat meat or to go see some movie or whatever, and I also have a constitutional right to take out an ad urging you to vote for some candidate. The stuff that I think you can more plausibly regulate is things like donations to campaign committees, which we do regulate. But the parts of this that are basically, wealthy individuals spending their money in order to encourage people to vote one way or another, I don't think that there's any way to prevent people from spending their money like that.
Nothing.
Well, but there was a way.
We had limits.
We did before Citizens United.
But
not really.
1974, the unraveling of a campaign finance infrastructure that has led to Buckley versus Valeo, which in many ways is the original sin. I think it was 1975 or 76, the Supreme Court decision equating money with speech.
But Buckley
there are
Valeo
many ways to carve out First Amendment and also maintain a democracy, because I don't think you can have a democracy with Citizens United decision, with dark money, and with what we're witnessing in terms of the pollution of our already polluted political system. Why is anything inevitable in this regard?
I think people also that money may be anonymous to us, to voters.
Right.
The dark money coming in, we don't know who's actually putting that money in. But I would imagine the candidates know who's putting in $10 million or $100 million.
Wait. Let Josh continue to respond, because we're going 4-on-1 here.
You can change the disclosure rules. I think it would be a good thing to change the disclosure rules and make it so that we know where this money is coming from. But I think people overstate how much citizens Citizens United changed the landscape here. I mean, as we discussed, you had the 527 groups before Citizens United. And if you change the law to prohibit super PACs, you'll be able to have a new structure that will look kind of like the 527s. I don't think there's any constitutional way to prohibit something that looks like that where people make independent expenditures.
Let me make this one just technical point, though. The coordination was really different, right? So in 2004, it really was the case. There was very strict enforcement, or even the enforcement wasn't strict. I know internally the norms from reporting on this were extremely strict. You do not coordinate.
Right.
So George Soros could go spend millions of dollars, and you're right, there's a certain amount of spending by wealthy individuals in a capitalist democracy with the First Amendment that is not regulatable, right? I mean, you can go buy a newspaper, or you can go give leaflets, you could print out 15 million leaflets and distribute them in every house, right? But the coordination between campaigns explicitly and these outside groups' independent expenditures, there was much more of a church-state separation in 2004 than there is post-Citizens United. This is just a technical point about what actually on the ground looks different between those two eras.
So that's not necessarily because of the rules. It's actually because the FEC is just deadlocked.
Yeah, I don't think people, I think this is an underappreciated aspect of this story. People talk about Citizens United, but there's actually a regulatory body called the FEC.
Is there? No.
There is, in theory, a regulatory body that promulgates rules that says, here is how we will interpret the court's decision and how we make that into on-the-ground rulings. And they actually have a fair amount of latitude, and they are basically a totally dysfunctional entity.
They haven't even interpreted Citizens United yet.
Right. And why is this the case? Explain this to people.
Well, basically, they can't even agree on how to set rules on deciding on how to interpret Citizens United, because it's made up of 6 people, 6 commissioners, and it has to be, 3 of them have to be Democrats, 3 of them have to be Republicans.
And have the Republicans obstructed?
Well, I mean, you just have there hasn't been really an attempt to do new appointments. I believe 5 of the 6 commissioners have their terms that are expired, and they're just continuing to serve. You've got 3 Republicans that do have a certain viewpoint, which is, and they're led by one particular commissioner who believes that there should not be regulations on campaign finance.
This is the guy head of the regulatory commission that does campaign finance regulation, just so we're clear.
Doesn't believe there should be campaign finance restrictions.
Right.
But I mean, can I slightly defend Josh just a little bit, because it is sort of
just slightly,
in the sense that I think that the surprise about Citizens United has been how little effect all of this money has ultimately had on the result. I mean, there's a certain point where you reach a point of media saturation where you just cannot watch one more ad, where the ads are on so much that they are not effective, for one thing. Number 2, I think it had more of an impact on the Republican primary than it did in the general election. And then number 3, I think the more insidious thing that's happened since Citizens United is you've actually opened the doors to employers, smaller employers, who have a lot more influence and a lot more possibility of intimidating their own employees. The coercion to vote for the candidate of the boss's choice, I think, is worse than the money.
Katrina, I suspect you disagree with that, and I want to hear why you do right after we take a break. Talking about what we've learned from running the first presidential campaign in the post-Citizens United era, what's been surprising, what hasn't happened that we thought might happen, what of our worst fears have been confirmed, and what might happen afterwards. And Josh was making a case that essentially, I think, some of this is inevitable. And Katrina, you...
Well, I mean, I think it's wrong to say that we still don't know. We still don't know.
Yeah, that's a good
There's
point.
so much to report. What I do think we know is that there's going to be a chill in our political system. I mean, you see down ballot more than at the presidential, the money that's pouring into the Senate and congressional races. So let's say this won't happen, but let's say some good person wants to run in Ohio, representing the 99%, ordinary people. First of all, will that person enter the race because the money is such a high barrier? And 2, will he or she, when they get into the Senate or the House or the state legislature, vote in a certain way because of the money fear? The other thing I would say is the coercion. I've just come back from Moscow, where we lecture the Russians. We lecture the world about how they should vote. I think we should get our own house in order. But there is anger at the Russians because they use their, quote, administrative resources to tell workers how to vote in certain provinces of Russia. You will lose your job if you don't vote for this boss. What are the Koch brothers? What is the Cintas in Ohio company doing when it demands workers come to a Romney fundraiser? So that piece of it is something that I think we're going to see more of. In any case, the most important thing, I think, is we come out of this election, we take a measure of Kim Barker's good work, of everyone's work, of getting the numbers, of the IRS giving us more information about what we don't know from these secret dark money operations, and try to find ways to reform this system.
Let me make one distinction I think it's important here. I think one of the things that is surprising about Citizens United is that it doesn't seem to have tipped the scales from a partisan perspective as much as we thought, which is to say, Democrats are still, here's outside money for the top
3-1
10.
though, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah,
It's
yes,
3-1.
but look at the top 10 Senate races, and Democrats looked like they were going to lose the Senate and now look like they're going to keep it in spite of all this money. Now, you could say counterfactually they'd have even more gains in the absence of the money, but I think the point I want to make here is that we have to distinguish between what are the partisan results of this and the ideological and governing differences.
The only way change sometimes comes about in our system, one way, is through fear. There's a reason that a lot of Democrats are the ones sponsoring clean money legislation. And the platform, as I recall, the Democratic Party platform has a point about the amendment to overturn Citizens United. There is a fear that they cannot win this arms race.
Right, but the question is,
but they've joined
it, A,
no
and
question.
B, my problem is less that Democrats as a party are going to be imperiled, and more that the things that I stand for
will be imperiled.
Things like making sure that poor people have access to the amazing, bountiful wealth and flourishing that is American society.
That is not on the minds of Shelley Adelson.
Exactly. Well, but it's not. The point is that stuff gets written out. So you can even have a situation in which you achieve partisan equilibrium between Democrats and Republicans, who both get very good at playing the game, but they are still playing the game within a certain sector of the electorate, which is the top 10th of 1%, the people they have to get money from, who set the agenda.
That's right.
And it's that setting the agenda. It's that part of it.
That shrinks our democracy and narrows the agenda.
Conversation.
Yeah.
But let's look at Ohio. I mean, this race where Sherrod Brown has been buried under all this money doesn't seem to matter. He's still going to win easily, and he strikes me as one of the more populist members of the Democratic caucus.
They have come very hard at Sherrod Brown outside money, and it still looks like he's going to win. And there's a bunch of different things I think you can take away from that. But more on this right after this break.